Hello, and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at the School of Visual Arts. We are thrilled to welcome photographer Juan Giraldo as tonight's guest speaker. Originally from Colombia, Juan was raised in Paterson, New Jersey, and in 2009 he graduated from William Paterson University with a BFA in photography. In 2015, he completed his MFA in photography from Columbia College in Chicago. Juan's work explores the personal interior spaces of working people, in particular, the employees of the Great Lakes Reload and his family in Paterson, New Jersey. He's intrigued by the textures and nuances of working life and the banal indicators of domesticity that shaped his view of the world, both as a first-generation immigrant and as a laborer. He has numerous awards, including he was awarded the AIR program at the Center for Photography at Woodstock, the Follett Fellowship from Columbia College, honorable mention in Anfoco's People, Places, and Things, and most recently, Juan was included in PDN's 30 and selected in Photolucida's Critical Mass Top 50. And that's a big group to get up to the top 50. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It's worth paying the fees.
Yes. Yes. No, it's both of those are great. And PDN there's no fee. You have to be recommended.
Yeah.
So his work has been featured in group exhibitions, including, maybe you've seen it, at the 2017 Photoville in Brooklyn and Eyes on Main Street. In 2016, Aki at the Perspective Gallery in Evanston, Illinois, and Art Now, and New Directions in Contemporary Photography in Ann Arbor Art Center. His solo exhibition, What Work Is, was shown at the Englewood Library and traveled to the American Labor Museum in New Jersey. So, please help me to welcome Juan Giraldo to our lecture this evening. Tiny sits here.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you, Marco and Katrine. So I'm going to just read some prepared marks that I have. Shouldn't be that long. And then I'll open it up to everybody for some questions and a discussion, because that's what this is all about. It's not just about my work, but my work in relation to, the environment I grew up in and the people and the ideas that I'm interested in. My journey as a photographer is not what you would call a conventional one. I stole a camera at 18 from Kmart, where I worked at the time. I was underpaid and curious about photography. The camera was a Vivitar 3000S. At around 23, 24, I decided I would become a photographer and abandoned hopes of pursuing a career as an architect or lawyer. My mother was worried, to say the least. And the first slide that came up was the first roll of film I ever shot that was successful. I mean, the pictures are awful, but I just want, I include stuff I did like years ago, especially when I speak in, groups like this, because it's like, hey, nobody starts at the top. You all, for lack of better, and I don't mean you, but I'm just saying we all don't start at the top, and we all make awful work, and that should never deter you from like just working through things regardless. And then this slide here was like the first photo that I felt was successful, both, that made me feel successful as an artist and as a photographer, and I felt that I was doing something right. I didn't know what it was at the time. I made some really awful work when I started out, but persisted and was encouraged by the end of my first formal photo class. It wasn't until my last year of undergrad, when I began to photograph Parker's shoe repair, that I felt like an artist and as a photographer. I made a picture of boots there, which was the beginning of what would be my first long-term project. I hadn't realized it then, but I was going from taking pictures to making them. They became more expressive, more emotive. After I graduated, I continued working as a carpenter in a sign shop. And then the best thing that I could ever ask for happened, which was the company went under and I was without a job. But it gave me time to go out and make pictures. Shortly thereafter, I traveled to my native Colombia for 3 weeks. And, in those 3 weeks, it gave me the opportunity where I made it a priority to go out every day and make pictures. And if the weather was bad, I I would be indoors and I would make pictures of my grandfather's apartment and his interior spaces. And, I think that those pictures would inform the way I would go on to work later on, both, with the work I made in the Midwest and the work I began to pursue around my family. I did that until the day I left. The work I made there got me into grad school not once but twice. That being said, grad school gave me what all artists want, time to make work. And I remember running into Jason Roblando, who also had graduated from the program in 2010 at, I think it was like SP in Chicago that year. And we were talking, and it's like, I was an older student. Everybody was in their early 20s in my program, or mid 20s, and I sort of felt like a fish out of water. Even though I was like still making work, I was like just, I felt a little out of place. But he said to me something that resonated and stuck with me the rest of my time there, which is like, you're never gonna have 3 years to make work. And that sort of, stuck with me. And I just kept making work and kept making work. And when I thought I had enough time, I wish I had more time. School made me think about my personal history and identity as a first-generation Latino, immigrant, and laborer. I wanted to make work that spoke to those things and about those experiences. I wanted it to be autobiographical, but without me in it, especially after seeing so much work that had been made of people of color by, trying to be polite here, but mostly by straight white guys, right? It's sort of like the history of the medium. And of the type of work that I wanted to make and was making. I mean, Latinos and African Americans, minorities in other words, are, while somewhat relevant in the medium, are very few in the art books. And because we don't write them, I wanted to sort of interject, my viewpoint as best I could, in that history. And so, I came to this country with my brother Luis in August of 1981 and settled in the Riverside section of Paterson, New Jersey. I spent 30 years there before I left. I would come to rely on this personal narrative as I moved forward as an artist. Writers often say, write about the things you know. I applied this to my conceptual framework and work ethic. I began to look at the things that I knew, not just as a photographer, but my experience as a Latino immigrant, worker, and the Riverside neighborhood I grew up in. After I moved to Chicago at the end of August 2012, shortly thereafter I began to search for the sights and sounds, for those things that were my norm for so many years. That October I reached out to many companies in and around Chicago about photographing in their, whether it was a factory or a manufacturing plant, anything that was industrial. But they all pretty much said no for a host of reasons, whether it was like trade secrets, liability issues, even though I sent them a waiver of liability. It's like, I will hold you not responsible, like for one thing that might happen to me. But they still sort of balked, and they weren't too thrilled with the guy coming in with a camera to photograph. But that being said, Great Lakes Reload, henceforth GLR, was the only company that responded to my letter. They gave me access to their facilities, and I basically came and went as I pleased there. GLR is a 385,000 square foot warehouse located on Chicago's southeast side. They transport, store, and process various types of steel products: sheet, plate, bar, beam, and tube products. Joe Marias, the operations manager, contacted me after receiving my letter. They welcomed me there, and I felt like I was home. I spent a year making pictures there and at one of their other locations in Hammond, Indiana. Later on that year, I traveled back to New Jersey that summer for work, and while there, I was thinking a lot about the work I had made, that year to that point, and I felt that there was something missing, in the work, because everything was all this work that was made in these factories, and after a while, fluorescent light, regardless of how beautifully you can use it, which is kind of like an oxymoron to say that about, fluorescent light, it gets for me, it got a little repetitive, and not depressing, but it's like, your color, you can only use that sort of color palette for so long before you feel like it's time to move on. And, at the end of that May, before I went out to New Jersey, my grandfather passed away. And, I realized, what was missing was this intimacy that, I had started to explore in my family work. Whether it was my dad at work, because I would help him out, like whether he was at, painting houses a lot. I'd bring my gear with me and I'd photograph him, and he's nice enough to let me take breaks and photograph him in the middle of painting a house. And on my first visit back, I brought up the idea of going into the homes to photograph them there, as we had discussed before. And like I said, like it never gained traction because we had talked about it before in like the previous year. But while we were very comfortable with one another, it's a big deal for someone, regardless of how comfortable they are with you, to let them in, for them to let you into their home. And so I used those photographs I made of my parents that summer, and I used them as currency. With those images, they saw that I was, one, willing to make myself vulnerable as a person and as an artist, more importantly as a person, right? Because, here are my parents, in their home. And, if any of you ever try to photograph somebody that's in your life personally, not just somebody you have, a not so intimate relationship with, it can be difficult because of like, well, everybody has like this notion of what they want to be in an image, especially family. And, my mom is she's very self-conscious, but I'm her oldest, so I kind of use that to my favor. But in any case, I took these pictures, I used them as currency, and they saw that, okay, he's not, he also does this with his family. He's not just trying to use us for his own benefit. And the images were made in like a thoughtful and respectful and meaningful way. It also helped that at this time I began to transition from working with a DSLR to a 4x5 field camera, which slowed me down, making me much more aware of my physical environment. Because I still shoot digitally, right, for like assignments and even once in a while for even my own work. But sometimes you get wrapped up in just like shooting, and you shoot so much that sometimes when you go back and you look at your work, you begin to wonder what was I shooting in the first place. And so, a 4x5 camera really slowed me down. It made me really consider all four corners of the frame. And they also saw that, that I was like being a lot more slow and a lot more deliberate. And it sort of broke them down because like just from them sitting there, it sort of put them into a more relaxed state, which helped us both. It made it much more collaborative between the both of us. The relationship of photographer and subject a little more solidified. They gave me access to their homes in a way that I had only dreamed of. They began to call me part of their family. Over time, GLR came to feel eerily familiar. The smell of diesel and cigarettes reminded me of the loading dock I worked on in my youth. GLR's dock workers share qualities with so many of my family members, former co-workers, and friends. Formalizing myself with their personal anecdotes and experiences allowed me to embrace the details, beauty, and drama of the mundane, which unfolded as I continued to photograph them. A strong bond emerged, which allowed me to photograph my subjects as I would my family. The evidence by the decor of these homes reveals their residence of people of Catholic faith, first-generation immigrants, and blue-collar manual laborers. In their stories, I see echoes of my past. Intimate spaces reveal the textures of a working life. A Gatorade bottle as a vase uncovers the beauty in the banality of domesticity. My portraits and still lifes highlight objects of importance and their iconographic meaning in these settings, reflecting a reverence for my personal history and the lives of the people I photograph. Now that being said, this process is one of, like I said, it's a long one. It hasn't been like I haven't had a traditional trajectory. I mean, I still, from time to time, work as a carpenter and as a house painter, and then I also pick up editorial gigs when when anybody contacts me. So, now that I've sort of talked a little bit, I'd like to hear, a little bit from you guys as well, and, open it up for questions, but I also, kind of want to open up myself for for any discussions or any questions or any concerns that you guys might have, whether it's about my work or issues you might have of your own as a photographer. I mean, for me, like I said earlier, the reason I started to photograph and definitely started photographing, my family and the people that I photograph are my ideas haven't changed from the time I really picked up a camera. I think the things that have changed are the conceptual framework for the way I make work, and just I do a little bit more research about the work that I'm making, whether it's my own personal history or the areas that I'm working in. And, I may talk in sort of like a poetic way, but it doesn't mean that I don't know the context in which I'm working on, both the environment I'm working in or, as it is, the times that we're going through. And, when I started this body of work, I remember somebody asked me not too long ago in an interview how I felt about the current political climate and how it fit into that. And I said, well, I never, when I started this, it's going to be 6 years now almost since I started this, I never thought about that. I mean, for me, it started earlier than that, and it started more so when the markets started crashing in 2008 and we were going through a recession because, everybody always talked about the middle class, but nobody really touched on the working class and the people in the neighborhood that I grew up in, which were predominantly Latino and other people of color and other minorities. And it was always the middle class, and that sort of always bothered me because, I lost my job, my friends lost their job, and nobody was really paying attention to them. And so, it sort of planted a little seed in the back of my mind. Yes.
Wait.
Put the previous picture.
Yeah,
back?
absolutely. This one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you photograph that on 4x5?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that the majority of the work in this slideshow, with the exception of the black and white stuff, is predominantly 4x5.
Well, this has a very much of the feeling that your earlier black and white has of your family. It's got a humility to it, and it's believable. It looks like it's not pose. And I was just wondering also, when you're shooting with a 4x5, you're using a hand meter?
Yeah.
Did you use any Polaroid?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, cool.
I take I'm very pragmatic, It's I rate my film, I shoot portrait 400 and I shoot it at 200, and I meter shadows, mainly, or depending on the situation. If it's really bright, then I'll meter for the highlights more than the shadows. Just more latitude in the shadows.
Hi, hello, Juan.
Hi, Terry.
All right. All right. So I have a question. You made a distinction earlier about your process, the way you make images. You talked about taking images and making images.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you can maybe elaborate on that, because I think it's an important distinction.
Yeah.
And also talk about maybe what brought you from one way of making images to another. And it seemed as if, for example, the difference between the black and white images and the color was that point, that sort of demarcation line, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I stress this a lot with, when I teach and even in discussions like this. I mean, the one thing, there was one piece of advice I got from a friend in a meeting one time, and he said to me, he's like, because I was like, I'm in Chicago and it's just totally foreign land to me, right? I'm in Chinatown for Chicago's Chinatown. I'm walking around and just I'm literally just taking pictures of things that sort of capture my eye the way you would with your cell phone, right? And in that first meeting, when I showed my friend, the work I had made, he looked at it and I can tell he was kind of underwhelmed by what I'd done, because it's I'm new to the city. I don't know what's where, and I'm trying to find my bearings. And he gave me a really good piece of advice. He's like, at the end of the day, you are still a visual artist. And so that stuck with me. And so, it wasn't even there. It was more so, I think, when I transitioned from shooting, with a DSLR, that I went to a 4x5 camera that slowed me down, that I think that's where that transition from just solely taking pictures to making pictures, because you only have two sheets, we're only shooting one sheet at a time. And it's very deliberate, it's very slow, everything is so controlled that you basically are constructing the scene. So you are making, even if it's, like this was kind of like found, but again, with a 4x5 image, it's not like I was like, oh, hey, click, and you're done. It's like you're making and you're controlling every aspect of the shot in one aspect or another. And as far as going from black and white to color, when I went to Colombia, I had, this is like, it's going to be 10 years now. And, I went down there with a DSLR, and it was great. It had a 5D Mark II, which was probably at that point less than 6 months old. And it was a great camera to use. And I realized, you know what, it may seem cheesy, but it's like, I see better in color than I do black and white. And I think when I shot in that shoe repair place, I thought that black and white served it best. And I, still sort of not all the way out of it yet, but I still had like these outdated sort of ideals about what photography was supposed to be. And so I had like these, traditionalist, like very traditional mode of like not even making this, because I kind of felt like taking pictures. And then I didn't realize until later on when I went back and I looked at that black and white work, especially those set of boots, that has sort of like planted that seed for that transition. And I also realized, like, you know what, I don't live in a world where things are black and white, everything's in color. It's tougher to handle, and I think to sort of build a narrative around the things that I was really interested in, like the poetics of like everyday life and like, boring drama. I just kind of felt that color was the way to do that,
You shoot mostly natural light?
No, I used a lot of mixed light. I use strobes in my work, but you wouldn't be able to really tell. I use it basically kind of as like a little fill to help with exposure if need be. But a lot of it is just a lot of natural light. You use whatever tools you have at your disposal. It's not, I don't want to like get bogged down and say it's like, oh, you can only make a picture this way. Use whatever tool you're comfortable with, and whatever's going to help you sort of construct that narrative around your work, you use that. I don't subscribe to one thing or another. I'm not anti-digital. I'm not pro, film. I do whatever feels best for like my process. That just so happens to be 4x5 color film. But like we're all different, and we all work differently. And so whatever works for you, that's fine. And you shouldn't let anybody ever tell you, like, well, I think you should use a digital camera, or you should use a medium format film camera. At the end of the day, what matters most is, the image and the narrative that you're trying to construct around the work that you're trying to make,
Is your work, and this might be a silly question,
No,
but
no such- I
is it considered more journalistic or more documentary?
It's, for me, I have my own opinions of PJ, but that's different. No, it's not photojournalistic at all. It's documentary, but at the same time, it's like categories are very tricky, because it's like, oh, we're going to put you in this category. You're a documentary photographer, but I really wouldn't consider it all that much documentary. I consider it more fine art, and it's more portraiture and still life than anything else. So if I'm going to call myself anything, I'm going to call myself a portrait photographer, really, who does still life as well, because I kind of see still lifes as like a stand-in for for people. It's not so much about the thing as it is about them too, because you know those are their possessions, those are their material things that they, you know, that have not so much a financial value, but you know there's some intrinsic, you know, thing to it that they, you know, that they put on it that you know, has like some sort of, I don't want to say sentimental value, but it definitely has something, you know, another, you know, value to it that you just, you know, can't put like a financial, like dollar amount to it, I should say.
I love how you mentioned that you did work with your parents and then you use those images as currency.
Yeah, I mean, let me just scroll back real quick.
Now, these other families, did you show them those pictures? Do you give them prints?
Yeah,
Like, and
absolutely.
how long, I mean, because sure, come into our house. I mean,
I used, like, this was the picture I used. Like, I walked into their home, you know, into the office with this picture of my mom and dad. And that's where they live, and you know, it's and you know, they saw, it's like, oh, okay, you know, Juan's like the real deal. Is like he does say that he comes from these areas, and so that, you know, that you know, that put them at ease. And I've always been in the habit of, you know, when people give me their time, I always give them a picture back. And everybody that's here in this presentation, everybody has a picture of this in their home. And you know, when I print for like finals, like for you know, a show that allows for this work, you know, the edition sizes, you know, these are all edition of 5, and they're all 40 wide by 30 high. And you know, I have a bunch of like artist proofs and like, you know, rejects, and 9 times out of 10, I always roll it. You know, when I was still living in Chicago and I would go back to their homes or back to the warehouse, I roll up the print and I give it to them, because like, I don't want to destroy it. I mean, they gave me, and you know, on top of that, I always gave them 17 by 22 prints. I mean, it's their likeness, and you know, from their likeness, I'm making you know, a career out of somebody else's image, and you know, there has to be some sort of equivalence in that. And so I always, for me personally, it's always important to give them back a copy of their likeness, or of something I shot in their home. And you know, one of the biggest thrills was when I was still living in the Midwest, and I would go into like the southeast side, or I'd go to one of the suburbs where they lived. I would see like a picture I did of them just hanging up somewhere, and it was like, it was just, that was just as rewarding as, you know, some of the other accolades I've received, because it's like, you know, they appreciate that, you know, that I'm coming in there and I'm making pictures with them. And I don't know, it was like such a thrill for me, and you know, it just makes me sort of feel a little bit more validated by that sometimes. And you know, I remember her dad said to me, her dad's like first generation guy, came here like maybe 20 years ago. His wife, you know, she's like second or third generation now. And you know, I photographed this young woman a bunch of times where she's looking out the window, and you know, I gave him back the picture, and you know, they liked it. But I remember like on one visit, her mom, Leticia, said to me, oh, why you gotta photograph Leslie in front of my ghetto windows? And I'm like, it's not about the ghetto windows. It's like, you know, and then I go into like nerdy photo artist. I was like, well, it's like the way the purple wall in conjunction with the blue in the background and all this and all that and the yellow, you know. And so and then like she's looking at me, it's like, fine, you're right. It's like they've never said no, but it's interesting that her husband, who, you know, neither one of them, you know, are gone to art school as far as I know, or you know, outside of like maybe in grade school took an art class. You know, he said to me, he's like, you know, she may say that, but it's like, I don't see it that way. I see it as this like thing that Leslie, you know, his daughter, is gonna look at in 30 years, 20 years, and it's like, yeah, you remember that, and you remember Juan, and you remember where we used to live, you know. And so it's like, it's that, you know, it's art, but it's also that too, you know. For me, it's art. For them, it's I don't want to say memento, but it's, you know, it's like this little slice in time, you know, because time does fly. And, I don't have kids, but I'm sure for those of you that do, they kind of grow up quick. I mean, like I said, I don't have kids, so I don't know what that's like. But I can say, from having a brother that's 28 years old, I saw him grow up really quick. And so that's as close as I have to having a child is like my 28-year-old brother, right? And so, time flies, and, I like having those conversations with them just as much, because they're impromptu. It's like they just happen. And I mean, when I photographed Lorraine here, I came in, I set things up, and we just talked. I think I talked to her more. I think it took me, whatever, like the picture happened in however long it took to set up and actually take. And I spent more time talking with her and eating her cornbread than I did, it probably took me longer to break everything down and pack up than I did to make the image. But, there's these things for me as a photographer that happen beforehand and afterhand that, when I look back at the image, it's I was like, okay, I'm happy with this image. I like the way it looks. They're happy with it. I'm happy with it. But, for me, personally, it's there's all these little stories that happen that, that I hold on to because I may not see, I don't know when's the next time I'm going to see them, but I also have that memory, of that time that we shared. And I know that the next time I'm in the Midwest, in Chicago, in the Chicago area, or somewhere in the suburbs, if I send them a text or a quick phone call, they may not get back to me right away, but they'll get back to me, in whatever time they do, and I'll say, hey, can I come and make some new pictures? And they'd probably say, yeah. Or they'll ask me, hey, we're having this party. Do you mind coming here and photographing this event for us? And I'm like, yeah, because at the end of the day, it's it would be shitty on my part to say the least that, hey, you guys gave me your time. I'm going to do this for you. I mean, the pictures are whatever, they're like any event pictures, right? They're not the greatest, but they're happy at the end of the day. And, it's like that equivalence I talked about. It's hey, they gave me time. I got to, give you back not just print, but, I'll do this for you because you gave me time. And a lot of times in those parties, I bring everything. I bring, strobes, I bring a 4x5, I bring everything that I have with me. And sometimes those pictures happen, some of the pictures I've made in the past happen, at those parties and at those gatherings because you just don't know what might present itself. I mean, there, a couple slides back, there was a picture of a young man leaning up against the fence, a chain link fence, and that's how that happened. I went to go, photograph them, the anniversary or their grandmother's birthday who had passed a couple years back, and everybody had these cool granny rest in peace pictures, and the light was just perfect. I said, I believe his name is Leslie as well, I think, because he's one of the guys that I photographed a lot, his younger brother, and it's what he was wearing, his Nikes, it's perfect. He was everything was great, the color palette, and I was like, do you mind just doing this? I said, this is gonna be a little slow, but and it happened. And sometimes I develop these relationships over time, and sometimes these things just happen in the 5 minutes that I have with the folks that I meet that are extended relatives or other family members of the folks that I have been photographing for a while. And I also use this image as currency. This is sort of where I started to realize that the work was missing this intimate level. And my dad and I were finishing up this paint job, and I saw him, do that the day before, and I said, hey, Dad, do you mind if you do this for me? And he's very impatient, and he's like, okay. And so I shot it. I was I looked at it, and I sent the film to get it processed, and then I had also backed it up on my digital camera because I was still getting my bearings using a 4x5, and I wasn't so comfortable with it. And I'm glad I did because it's the film, I had loaded it in backwards, so it got cross-processed, and so a good shot of that image. Yes.
When you're shooting with your 4x5, are you using a reflex housing or are you using a dark cloth?
Dark cloth.
Because your composition's really nice.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. No, I use the dark cloth.
Such a geek.
I know.
Love
I mean,
it. Yeah.
you know. It's
Yeah, I'm
like-
going to translate. For people that haven't shot 4x5, a reflex is actually like a mirror that flips the image so it's right side up. If you're using a dark cloth, you're looking at the world upside down, but you get used to it.
Yeah, in 4x5, you know, as opposed to like a rangefinder or you know an SLR, there's no mirror that inverts everything. It's like, you know, if your brain didn't have like this optic nerve, you'd see the world upside down. And so that's what happens with the 4x5. It's basically a box with the lens at the end, and there's nothing. So everything's upside down and backwards. And so you have to think, well, left is not left, left is right. You know, when you want somebody to move, and you know, so like that's what it's all about. You know.
I have two questions.
Sure.
One, sort of, I think your images kind of exist on this like continuum in terms of themes and like all these things. So how do you even think of them as like projects or groups of pictures of bodies of work, or kind of do you think about it all as one thing? And then how do you see your images best presented? Like, is it like through exhibitions in like a gallery space or like a book or with text? Like, how important is all the other information around the visuals? So, yeah.
You know, I do see, excuse me, I see both projects as like two separate things, but you know what ended up happening because you know I'd be in Chicago for months at a time, and then I'd come back home in like intervals for like breaks, and you know I would make work because I just wanted to make work, and I was like just itchy to like make images, right? And so what I started noticing was that my approach wasn't different in either aspect, especially because you know Paterson isn't that dissimilar from you know the southeast side where somebody lived, or certain parts of Hammond, Indiana, you know, or like Calumet City. So they are two separate bodies of work, but the ideas are still the same thing, you know, and you know that they are separate. But what I did do was I combined both projects into like an artist book, which I titled like A View from Home, because you know, I should have brought it, but the themes are still the same, and for me, like I said earlier, you know, my ideas haven't changed. I think maybe the conceptual framework around it has like improved and is different. And then I think in terms of like presentation, the way I think about it is I still like to see a physical print, you know. I think about it in three ways. I think about it as like a book, a print, and then the web, right? In those three categories. But like, you know, you could put it into a box and show it, and like you have to wait till you can show it to the world, because like you can make images in it, but it's not until you get in touch with the right person or gallery or somebody sees it, and so that's why like web is like so important. I mean, but I'll tell you this: I shoot a lot of film, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to put it on the web. I mean, it takes me time to like sit and look and sort of, well, can it go on the web, or should I hold it back? You know, it's like I mean, it's kind of like simple economics. It's like supply and demand type thing. I mean, it's kind of like that. I mean, you don't want to oversaturate the viewer as well, and so you always want to, you know, at least for me, you want to entice people to like contact you about stuff, and then start a conversation, and like then you get like, oh, hey, do you want to do a studio visit, that sort of thing. But I think one of my favorite things to make are books, and because I think it's just pretty much the most democratic way that people can, outside of the web, right? But you know, the web makes everything look beautiful, and I think the true test of whether, you know, the work that you're making is good is like something physical you can look at, whether it's a book or a physical print. So I mean, for me, those are like the things that are like really important, is like something physical that you can hold in your hand.
Hi, Juan. I just wanted to ask you about color.
Okay.
It seems like you've gotten very comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Is that how you feel now, or?
I mean, uh, yes, I will say yes. You know,
No, I mean,
but it's like you're never really comfortable with anything, you know, and I think that's good, right? Because it's like the minute you get comfortable with anything, it's like, oh, you at least I feel like I'm in trouble, right? Because it's like, you know, you sometimes you fall into a lull when you're a little too comfortable. But yeah, I mean, you know, I've been shooting color now for like the last 10 years, right? But when I went down to Wilson, North Carolina for the first time 2 years ago now in 2016, I couldn't afford color film, right? So, but I wanted to make some work while I was down there, and so you know I started shooting black and white again, and I shot black and white again last year. But then this time around, when I was there in January for like a month-long residency, I brought down with me like 50 sheets of color for the month. And you know, while I was there, I did 2 projects. Every day I would go in the mornings for about 10 days, you know, 10 business days, 10 straight business days. I went into the Bridgestone tire plant, you know, and I shot everything digitally. But then my last 2 days, I shot 4x5 portraits in black and white, and some still life in black and white, and I did it because I wanted the portraits to be about the people I was photographing and not all this like, because despite it being like this huge factory, it was like really bright because they used like these new like LED technology to light it, but it was like it was a lot more colorful than I thought, and I just didn't want, you know, my portraits of them, you know, on the 4x5 to be dominated by like all this color and, you know, all this like kind of, the light was okay actually. I was like very happy with the light, but I wanted it to just be about them and not about everything else that was going on around them, you know. And also, you know, sometimes I didn't shoot anything that was trade secret, but just to kind of put, you know, my handler at ease that, like, you know, I wasn't trying to do anything. But, you know, we had a good rapport. But like I said, it's like for that specific project, you know, I was also thinking of like Louis Hine, you know, when I did those portraits of them there. Yeah.
and also just another question. Again, going back to color, it seems like the color that you use is very subtle. It's not Kodachrome
Yeah.
compared to that. Is that on purpose, or?
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of nerdy about the times I like to shoot, right? Yeah. This is the first time I'll ever say I'm happy for daylight savings time, right? Because just I get like some extra light at the end of the day, and you know, I pay attention to the light all the time, and you know, I don't, you know, you know, you're just trying to make. At least for me, I don't want one thing to dominate the other. And so, you know, I want him to be, you know, I want it to have some drama, but I don't want it to be like this thing that hits you over the head, right? And so, you know, I kind of time is like, well, I'm going to shoot from, you know, what time, you know, the sun's coming up around 7 these days. And so I was like, okay, like maybe from 7 to 10, I'll go out and shoot, right? Take a break during, you know, the rest of the day. And then go back out around, you know, 3:45 and look for things. And then it's like, well, all right, the sun's here. I do this thing where I like stick a fist up at the sun. Go, okay, so around 5 o'clock, it's going to be here. Then 6, you know, so I do that. And so like, this is some of the work that I did while I was in Wilson. This is Elvira, and this is at the Bridgestone tire plant. Because, you know, people always ask, he's like, oh, well, what are you doing next? So I was like, I figured I'd stick some slides in here of some of the stuff I've been doing the last couple of months.
Just another question. So I wanted to kind of maybe return a bit to your process.
Sure.
Because sometimes, a lot of times when we look at images in this format, what escapes us is the the process, the attention to detail that we sometimes see in the image as object. And I'm aware of your work, and I'm aware of your, your journey from analog to digital, analog color to digital, and I know that you spend a lot of time working on the images themselves, and I'm particularly actually interested in you talking about what I see, and maybe you can confirm or not, the relationship between the sort of craft aspect in the books that you make. So and I'm thinking particularly of that one book you made in graduate school. Okay, right. So, but there's this attention to detail, and it's almost seems like you're honoring the sort of work aesthetic.
You just answered my question.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. But you can elaborate. You can elaborate on it
No,
for sure.
absolutely. So for me, the image itself is always really important, right? And I think my work ethic, comes into play. Not just my work ethic, as a photographer, but I'm just saying my work ethic as a person that's done manual labor from the time he was, 18 up till now, and I'm 40, so it's like I've been working, with my hands since I was like 14, and then like really hard, heavy labor from the time I was 18, right? And so, when you have that type of work, especially when you're a carpenter and a house painter, it's all about the details, right? And that sort of filtered into the way that I approach art. It's very pragmatic, right? I may write in sort of like in a poetic way, but my approach is very much as like, this is what's going to happen. This is when it's going to happen. I'm going to work on my computer from this time to this time. And so I take a very workman approach. And when it comes to, just after I make the image, if it's film, it gets sent out to get processed. I scan it. I dust this thing because the bigger the negative, the more dust, falls on it. And if your Imicon or your flatbed scanner is not super clean, then there's like an extra layer of dust. So, I'll spend anywhere from 45 minutes to like dusting this thing. And then here come the color corrections, the burning, the dodging, the traditional things that you do in a darkroom. Oh, and I might add, if I have access to a color darkroom, I'm gonna go and make color darkroom, contact sheets so I can see if it's worth me scanning something, because, the last thing you wanna do is like scan something and then all of a sudden it's like, why did I spend all this time working on this thing when it wasn't everything it was cracked up to be? And then I make a test print, and then you start doing like local adjustments and all that, and then you finally have a finished print, and the finished file will get uploaded to the web. The image, you might go into like this project, or here's a new project. And so yeah, it's very pragmatic, and then in terms of making a book, it's I make a bunch of little 5x7 or 4x6 prints, pin them up, start looking at sequence, see how that flows. Then you start laying it out in InDesign. It's like, well, should this be a 2-page spread? Should this be how big on the page? Do you want like a consistent layout in terms of, well, if you did this, are you going to keep it consistent? And so, I think about the rhythms, and then you think about color and the way, like the pacing of a book. Print this thing, I'll print out like 5 or 6 copies with just like different iterations. And it's like, well, does this typeface look good? And I'm like, no. And then after you're kind of happy, then you start doing like the nerdy technical things and like spell checking and like, oh, I forgot an S here, like this is misspelled. Don't forget to thank your friends at the back, because it's like super important, or they'll be pretty pissed if you forget to thank them. And then, then at least for this last artist book I made, I sent it out to I forget the name of the place in Jersey. They did the printing for me, and they printed all my spreads. They shipped it back to me, and a conveyor. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, Conveyor, they do a lovely job. So if any of you are ever thinking of doing an artist book or just like a small edition of books, I highly recommend Conveyor. And they're lovely to work with. They won't let you on press, but you know, they're pretty nice about new communication. And you know, they printed my spreads for me, and I started binding 25 books. You know, and at the end, I did hire some friends to help me finish some of the binding and some of the, you know, like laying covers. And you know, that's when, you know, the attention to detail, like for me, came in. You know, like, you know, that work ethic and like getting everything right. You know, and so yeah, I mean, it's kind of a long explanation, but yeah.
Well,
it's,
I think, hang on, I think for the students here, you've pretty much summed up what we do here at SVA and in our department. We pay attention to all the details. And I know some people have a few more questions, but I know some students here are nervous about their homework assignments. So I'm going to ask everybody to thank you for your presentation. Yeah. And now I'll let the students go because they're stressing. But if you have
Is it
more
midterms?
questions- Oh, God. Thesis.
thesis.
Yes. That was desperation. But Carlos, if you want to come up and ask questions, that would be great. Okay?
Thank you for coming out. I know it's like
You can go ahead.
it's like the middle of the semester, and good luck, and all I have to say is, if you're stuck, just shoot your way out.
Yes.
It does work. I will say it does work.